Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So as you guys know, a few months ago I made a tutorial video on how to make a Windows XP virtual machine. Today I am taking that topic and I am broadening it. Since I was 10, I've liked to play around and experiment with virtual machines. Some of them have practical purposes, but most are just for fun. The big three I've been experimenting with are Windows XP, Windows Vista, and Windows 7, and I've also experimented with Windows 8 and Windows 10 a few times. In this video, we are going to look at the installation process and experience of Windows XP, Windows 7, and Windows Vista on a virtual machine, and using a special criteria, we're going to determine which one is best suited to make a virtual machine with. Now without further ado, let's get into the video. So I've set up Windows XP VMs tons of times before, so the setup process is all too familiar to me. The setup was straightforward, but I was not able to skip past the product key prompt. Therefore, a valid product key will be needed to set up Windows XP. However, I was able to get to the home screen with ease. Now it's time to set up the graphics drivers. VirtualBox Guest Editions is built into the app and is super easy to install. Now we can enter full screen mode. This enhances visibility and makes it easier to work with. Now we need to install Service Pack 3. This can be found on the Microsoft Update catalog. There are several methods of file transfer to the VM, but the easiest way is to enable drag and drop, which allows us to take the file in our downloads folder and drag it to the desktop of the VM. Once the Service Pack is installed, we are almost finished. Last, we need to get a new browser since Internet Explorer is obsolete. MyPal works great for these older OSs, and I totally recommend it. Whilst Windows XP was quite easy to set up if you know what you're doing, I could not say the same for Vista. This was the hardest of all three to set up. The initial setup process went smoothly, and I could even bypass the product key prompt. However, from the desktop onward, it was nothing but trouble. Service Pack 1 was already installed, so I didn't bother with that. Whilst I was able to install Guest Editions, I was unable to get the desktop into full screen mode. I had to go into settings and manually change the resolution, and even then I couldn't get to 1080p. To add insult to injury, I couldn't even get Aero since the performance index feature was broken. However, I was able to get MyPal installed, so I got Vista somewhat functional. Windows 7 was the easiest of all three to set up. The installation process was pretty straightforward, and you could skip the activation part. Once we got to the desktop, I was able to install Guest Editions and activate Aero. Then I got to work installing MyPal since most browsers cut support for Windows 7 earlier this year. Overall, I would say Windows 7 was the easiest to set up. I've made a criteria for the OSs which consist of 5 categories: installation, visibility, style, internet access, and ease of use. There were others that I considered including a compatibility category, but let's be real, most people aren't using these VMs as their daily driver. For Windows XP, the installation process was pretty straightforward with the exception of the product key, so it gets an 8 out of 10. For visibility, I was able to get into full screen mode, but the wallpaper didn't change, therefore it gets a 9 out of 10. The style of the blue XP interface isn't necessarily bad to look at, but Aero is so much better, therefore it gets a 5 out of 10. As for internet access, I was able to surf the web with MyPal. Internet Explorer no longer works, but this isn't the OS's fault. The text is quite pixelated though, and it isn't snappy, so it gets a 7 out of 10. For overall ease of use, I give XP an 8 out of 10. Counting all those up, and Windows XP gets a 37 out of 50. Moving on to Vista. The installation process for Vista was quite straightforward like XP, but I wasn't forced to punch in a product key. It gets a 10 out of 10 in installation. For visibility, I was unable to get into 1080p even with manual controls, therefore it gets a 5 out of 10. For overall style, I would normally give it a 10 out of 10 thanks to Aero, but I couldn't activate Aero. Thus, it gets a 4 out of 10. Still looks better than XP though, but I'm setting it lower because I expected Aero. As for internet, I was able to load it up with MyPal, but some websites gave me issues. It gets an 8 out of 10 for internet. For ease of use, it gets a 6 out of 10 thanks to the complex settings. Overall, it gets a 33 out of 50. Windows 7 was my favorite, so I may have some bias, but here we go. The installation process was similar to Vista, so it gets a 10 out of 10. Unlike Vista, I got it in a 1080p after Guest Editions with ease, so it gets a 10 out of 10. Thankfully, I was able to activate Aero, so it gets a 10 out of 10 in style. Again, this may come from my own bias. I was able to load up the internet quite well using MyPal, so it gets a 9 out of 10 for internet. Windows 7 was much easier to use than Vista and XP, so it gets a 9 out of 10 for ease of use. Counting up the scores, and we are left with a 48 out of 50. Despite Windows 7's increasing lack of support, it continues to be a beautiful candidate for any good virtual machine. Windows XP is another good candidate if you got a product key. As for Vista, just do Windows 7. There's a reason they got it out so quickly after Vista. Well, that's it for today. I may make an update to this video in the future where I look at Windows 8 and 10 as well. To make that happen, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys later. Bye!